There are certain moments when you realize a problem isn't really about the thing you thought it was about. At first, you think it's about money, or property, or some minor annoyance that keeps showing up in your life. Then one day it hits you that it's actually about respect. That's exactly what happened to me. The first time I saw the tire tracks cutting across my lawn, I figured it was an accident. The second time, I wasn't so sure. By the fifth time, I was standing in my kitchen before sunrise, coffee in my hand, staring through the blinds like some kind of neighborhood detective, waiting to see if my new neighbor was really going to do it again. And sure enough, he did. Like it was the most normal thing in the world. I live outside Lexington, Kentucky, in one of those older neighborhoods where everything looks peaceful from the outside. Mature trees, wide streets, kids riding bikes, people waving from their driveways. The kind of place where you expect problems to be limited to barking dogs or somebody forgetting to bring their trash cans in. I bought my house a little over 3 years after my divorce. Now, I know that sounds like an odd detail to mention, but it matters. Anybody who's been through a divorce knows how strange life feels afterward. Everything becomes divided into before and after. Before the marriage ended, after the marriage ended, before the house sold, after the paperwork was signed. For a while, I felt like I was drifting through life with no real direction. Then I bought that house, and for reasons I still can't completely explain, I became obsessed with fixing it up, not in some HGTV kind of way. I wasn't knocking down walls or building swimming pools. I just liked taking care of things, replacing old shutters, repairing fence sections, planting flowers, keeping the yard looking nice. The side lawn became my favorite project. It sat along the corner of the property and honestly looked terrible when I moved in. Thin grass, hard clay soil, dead patches everywhere. Over 2 summers I transformed it. I rented equipment, installed drainage, brought in topsoil, reseeded the entire section twice. Most weekends you'd find me outside working while everyone else was watching football. My friend Eric used to laugh about it. You spend more time with that lawn than most people spend with their spouses. That's because the lawn doesn't argue with me, I'd tell him. That always got a laugh, but the truth wasn't really a joke. Working outside helped quiet my head. It gave me something to build, something that belonged entirely to me. And then came my neighbor. His name was Russell Kane. Russell moved in next door about 8 months after I bought the house, early 60s. Big guy, former contractor, from what I heard, always wearing mirrored sunglasses, even when clouds covered half the sky. He drove an enormous charcoal gray pickup truck that looked like it could pull a building off its foundation. The first conversation we ever had should have been a warning sign. I was checking the mailbox when he walked over. "You're the guy who owns the corner lot?" I laughed. "I hope so. The bank says I'm still making payments." He didn't laugh, just stared for a second before nodding. "Big yard." "Yeah, must take a lot of work." "It does." Then he looked over at the side lawn. "Seems like a waste." I remember thinking that was a strange thing to say. Not rude exactly, just odd. But I shrugged it off. People are different. Not everybody cares about landscaping. Not everybody spends their Saturdays planting grass. No big deal. A few weeks later, I noticed the first tracks, 2 tire marks running diagonally across the edge of the lawn. Nothing major. Maybe a delivery truck. Maybe somebody turning around. I'd filled the damaged area and forgot about it. Then it happened again. Same angle, same location. A week later, it happened again. This time I started paying attention. One Friday evening, I was grilling burgers on the patio when I heard the unmistakable sound of large tires rolling over soft ground. You know that sound. A crunch mixed with a squish. I looked up just in time to see Russell's truck cutting across the corner of my property before sliding into his driveway. I actually stood there for a second trying to process what I'd just seen, because surely nobody intentionally drives through someone else's yard, right? Apparently they do. I walked over while he was still climbing out of the truck. "Hey, Russell." He glanced over. "What's up? You just drove across my lawn." He looked down at the tire marks, then back at me, and shrugged. "Barely." "Barely? Didn't hurt anything." I pointed toward the grass. "It leaves ruts." His response came instantly. "Grass grows back." Then he grabbed a grocery bag from the passenger seat and walked inside. That was it. No apology, no explanation, nothing, just grass grows back. For some reason, that sentence bothered me more than the tire tracks. Maybe because it wasn't about the grass, it was the attitude behind it. The assumption that because something could be repaired, damaging it didn't matter. Still, I told myself not to overreact. Maybe he'd stop. Maybe he hadn't realized how much it bothered me. So I repaired the damage. Again. And then he did it again, the following weekend. And the weekend after that, every single time taking the exact same shortcut. Not because he had to, not because there wasn't enough room. Simply because it was easier. One Sunday afternoon, Eric came over to watch a game. The moment he stepped out of his truck, he noticed the fresh tracks. "Dang," he said. "What happened here?" I pointed next door. "Russell happened." He stared at the marks. "You talked to him? Twice?" "And?" I laughed. "Apparently grass grows back." Eric shook his head. "That's not the point." "I know." "No. I mean, he knows it's not the point." "What do you mean?" Eric took a sip of his drink. "Some people don't care about the damage. They care whether you'll stop them." That sentence stuck with me, because deep down I already knew he was right. The following Saturday gave me proof. I caught Russell outside washing his truck. Classic rock blasting from his garage, water running down the driveway. I walked over one last time, determined to handle things calmly. "Hey, can I ask you something?" He didn't even look up. "Shoot! Can you stop driving across my lawn?" He kept scrubbing the wheel. "You're still on that?" "Yeah, because you're still doing it." That finally got his attention. He straightened up and looked at me. "Buddy, it's a corner lot. So, everybody cuts corners, not through somebody else's property." He laughed. Actually laughed, like I'd just told a joke. Then he said something I'll never forget. "You really keeping score over grass?" I felt my jaw tighten, not because I was angry, because I suddenly realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't carelessness. This wasn't somebody making a mistake. Russell knew exactly what he was doing, and he genuinely believed I wouldn't do anything about it. Standing there in that driveway listening to him laugh, I felt something change inside me. Not rage, not frustration, clarity. Because the moment someone mistakes your patience for weakness, the entire situation becomes very simple. I walked back toward my house without another word. Russell yelled after me, "Don't lose sleep over it." I smiled to myself. Because for the first time since this started, I wasn't planning on arguing anymore. I was planning on documenting. And that decision would end up changing everything. The funny thing about being repeatedly disrespected is that eventually the actual damage stops bothering you. What starts eating at you is the confidence behind it, the certainty, the assumption that no matter how many times they cross a line, you'll keep absorbing it because making a scene feels more uncomfortable than letting it happen. That was where I found myself by early October. The tire tracks had become almost predictable. Friday evenings, Saturday mornings, sometimes Sunday afternoons. I could practically set my watch by them, and every time I saw those marks cutting through the side lawn, I felt less angry and more curious. How far would this guy actually take it? As it turned out, pretty far. Now, luckily, a year before all this happened, a string of car break-ins hit our neighborhood. Nothing major. Teenagers checking unlocked vehicles. Still, it had been enough for me to install a few security cameras around the house. At the time, I figured they'd probably never be useful. Turns out they were about to become my favorite purchase. One Friday evening around 7 o'clock, I pulled up the camera footage. There was Russell's truck, clear as day. The angle was perfect. You could see the property line. You could see the tires. You could even see chunks of dirt getting pushed aside as he rolled through the edge of the lawn. I watched it twice, then 3 times. Then I grabbed a flashlight and walked outside. For the first time, I wasn't fixing anything. I was documenting. Pictures from multiple angles, measurements of the ruts, close-up photos showing damaged grass, notes on the date and time. Everything. And I have to admit something. It felt strangely satisfying. For weeks I'd been reacting. Now I was building a record, a story told entirely through evidence. The following Monday during lunch break, I started researching local property damage laws. Nothing dramatic. I wasn't looking for some massive lawsuit. I simply wanted to understand my options. What I found surprised me. The threshold for small claims disputes was much lower than most people realize. You didn't need catastrophic destruction. You didn't need a 6-figure loss. You needed proof, documentation, repair estimates, a clear pattern of behavior. Well, I suddenly had all of those things. That evening I sat at my dining room table and created something Russell probably never imagined receiving. An invoice. Simple, professional, boring even. Property restoration estimate, labor, materials, reseeding. soil repair. Total amount due, $53.80. I attached photographs, included timestamps, printed everything neatly. Then I mailed it certified. No threats, no angry letter, no dramatic warning, just paperwork. 3 days later, I got confirmation that Russell had signed for it. I waited. Nothing happened. No phone call, no knock at the door, no apology, no payment. Then Friday arrived. I remember sitting in my living room watching through the front window, not because I was obsessed, because by then I was genuinely curious. Would he stop? At exactly 6:47 p.m., Russell's truck appeared. Wide turn, same shortcut, same lawn, same crunch. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. The man had received formal documentation days earlier and still couldn't help himself. That weekend became incident number 2. The next weekend became incident number 3, then 4, then 5, every single one captured on camera, every single one carefully filed away. Before long, I had created folders. Dates, photos, video clips, damage estimates, certified mail receipts. The entire thing started looking less like a neighborhood disagreement and more like evidence for a documentary. Meanwhile, Russell continued acting as if none of it existed until things started getting personal. One Tuesday evening, I got home from work and found my garbage can tipped over near the curb, trash scattered halfway down the street. At first, I figured the wind had caught it. Then Mrs. Harper from across the road waved me over. Mrs. Harper was one of those neighborhood fixtures everybody knew. Retired schoolteacher, late 70s, knew every piece of gossip before it became gossip. That wasn't the wind, she said immediately. What wasn't? She pointed at the trash. Your neighbor, Russell, she nodded. Saw him back into it this morning. I looked over. He stopped. Mrs. Harper actually laughed. Nope. Then her expression changed. You be careful with that man. Why? She lowered her voice. He doesn't like being embarrassed. For some reason, that sentence stayed with me all night. Because she was right. The invoices weren't costing Russell much money. Not yet. What they were costing him was pride. Every certified envelope arriving at his house reminded him somebody was documenting his behavior. Somebody wasn't letting it slide. And men like Russell often take accountability as a personal attack. A week later, I learned exactly how much. Saturday morning, 8 o'clock sharp. A pounding on my front door rattled the frame hard enough to wake me up. I already knew who it was. When I opened the door, Russell stood there holding a crumpled envelope. His face was red, jaw tight, the kind of expression people wear when they've spent the entire walk over rehearsing an argument. You got a problem? He snapped. I leaned against the doorway. Morning to you too? He held up the paperwork. This nonsense stops now. What nonsense? This. He shook the envelope. You're sending me bills for property damage, for grass, for damage, for grass, for damage. His nostrils flared. You seriously billing me every time a tire touches your yard? I shrugged. Actually, the last one included irrigation inspection. That didn't help. His face somehow got redder. You've lost your mind. And that's when something interesting happened. For the first time, I wasn't intimidated. A month earlier, this confrontation would have made me uncomfortable. Now, I felt calm, because facts are surprisingly relaxing when they're on your side. You could have stopped this weeks ago, I said. By doing what? Using your driveway. For a second, I thought he might step forward. His shoulders tightened, his hands clenched. Then he pointed toward my house. People around here think you're crazy. I almost laughed. Coming from a man standing on my porch screaming about evidence he didn't like, the irony was difficult to ignore. Instead, I simply said, good thing the cameras don't care what people think. Silence. Immediate silence. His eyes shifted upward, toward the small camera mounted beneath the porch roof. I watched the realization hit him. Not all at once. Gradually, like water seeping through concrete, the footage existed. The timestamps existed. The records existed. And none of his anger could erase them. He stared at the camera for several seconds, then looked back at me. Neither of us said anything. Finally, he turned around, walked back to his truck, and drove away. No threats, no shouting, nothing. Just silence. Standing there, I honestly believed that might be the end of it. I thought maybe reality had finally caught up with him. Maybe seeing the evidence had forced him to reconsider. Maybe common sense would finally win. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because what happened next turned a petty neighborhood dispute into something entirely different. 3 days later, the forecast called for rain, and not the heavy thunderstorm kind, the slow, steady kind that soaks into the ground all day long, the kind of rain that turns healthy grass into soft earth. By Friday evening, the entire yard was saturated. I remember looking outside around sunset and thinking one simple thought: please don't do it again. Not because I cared about another invoice, not because I wanted another argument. I was just tired of thinking about it, tired of documenting it, tired of giving energy to a man who seemed determined to create conflict wherever he went. For a few hours it looked like maybe I'd get my wish. Then headlights appeared at the end of the street, and my stomach sank. Russell. Only this time something felt different. His truck approached slower, wider, almost deliberate. I watched through the window as he began the turn, and instead of clipping the corner like usual, he drove deeper, much deeper, straight into the lawn. The rear tires cut through the saturated grass like blades through wet cake. Mud exploded behind the truck. One sprinkler head vanished beneath the tread. The vehicle fishtailed slightly before correcting itself, then disappeared into his driveway. For several seconds I just stood there staring, not angry, not shocked, almost impressed, because there was no longer any possible argument that this was accidental, no misunderstanding. No careless driving, no cutting corners. This was a message. The problem for Russell was that he had just sent that message directly into multiple high-definition cameras, and the footage looked absolutely devastating. The next morning, I walked outside with a cup of coffee and stopped halfway down the driveway. Even though I'd seen the footage the night before, it somehow looked worse in daylight. The lawn looked like somebody had dragged farming equipment across it. Deep trenches ran diagonally through the grass. Mud had been pushed onto the sidewalk. One of the sprinkler heads was completely destroyed. The ground around it looked churned up and mangled. For a few seconds I just stood there. Then I shook my head and laughed. Not because it was funny, because at that point the situation had become almost absurd. Russell had spent months acting like I was overreacting, months pretending this was all about a few blades of grass, and now my yard looked like the aftermath of a small construction project. Around noon I called a landscaping company I'd worked with before. The owner, a guy named Dennis, arrived later that afternoon. Dennis was the kind of man who would spend 30 years working outdoors and looked like he trusted evidence more than opinions. He stepped out of his truck, surveyed the damage for maybe 10 seconds, and whistled. "Well," he said, "that's impressive. Bad." He laughed. "If somebody was trying to destroy it, I'd say they did a decent job." We spent half an hour walking the property, measurements, photos, inspection of the irrigation line, soil displacement, replacement costs, everything. When he finally handed me the estimate, I stared at the number. $398 for a single incident, just that one. I thanked him, went inside and sat down at my kitchen table. Then I started organizing. Every video, every photograph, every certified letter, every invoice, every repair estimate. By the time I finished, the entire history of the conflict sat neatly arranged inside one folder. 14 separate incidents, 14 timestamps, 14 video clips, months of documentation. The final total came to $649.23. And suddenly I realized something. This wasn't a disagreement anymore. It was a pattern. A documented pattern. The following Monday, I filed the paperwork, small claims court, simple, clean, professional, no emotional language, no exaggeration, just facts. When I dropped the documents off, I felt surprisingly calm. Because the truth is, I wasn't doing it for the money. $600 wasn't going to change my life. What mattered was the principle, the acknowledgement. The idea that boundaries actually mean something, that people don't get to repeatedly damage what belongs to someone else and then hide behind excuses. A few days later, Russell got served. And for the third time since this all began, he showed up at my front door. But this version of Russell looked very different from the others. The anger was still there, you could see it, but something else had joined it. Worry. He stood on the porch holding the court paperwork. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, he asked, "You really filed?" "Yep." He looked down at the papers, then back at me. "All this over a lawn?" I folded my arms. "No." His eyes narrowed. "No?" His eyes narrowed. "No?" "This is about you being told no 14 different times." That landed harder than I expected. For a moment, something flashed across his face. Not anger. Recognition. Like he knew exactly what I meant, and maybe had known the whole time. He looked past me into the house. You really got videos of all of it. I stepped aside. Want to see? For a second I thought he'd say no. Then curiosity won. He followed me into the living room. I opened my laptop, pulled up the folder, and clicked the first video. There was his truck, crossing the lawn, timestamp visible. We watched the entire clip, then the second, then the third, then the fourth. At first he tried offering explanations. I was avoiding a car, except there wasn't a car. I didn't realize I was that far over, except the property marker was visible. The camera angle makes it look worse, except every angle showed the same thing. By incident 6, the explanations started disappearing. By incident 9, he stopped talking altogether. The room became strangely quiet. Just the sound of video after video playing. One clip, then another, then another. Months of behavior condensed into 20 minutes of undeniable reality. Finally, we reached the rainstorm footage. The last incident, the worst one. The truck sliding through the soaked grass. The mud flying. The sprinkler head disappearing beneath the tire. Even I had to admit it looked brutal. The video ended. The screen froze, and neither of us said anything for several seconds. Then Russell leaned back, rubbed his face, and quietly said 2 words. Damn! Not defensive, not sarcastic, just defeated. The fight left the room all at once. I think that was the moment he finally saw himself the way everyone else had been seeing him. Not as the victim, not as the tough guy, just a stubborn man who had allowed pride to turn a simple request into a months-long conflict. Eventually, he looked over. What's the number? I already knew what he meant. 64923. Another pause, then a slow nod. I'll take care of it. And that was it. No dramatic speech, no threats, no courtroom showdown, no neighborhood meeting. Just 2 middle-aged men standing in a quiet living room, staring at the consequences of one man's refusal to back up his truck properly. 3 days later, I came home from work and checked the mailbox. Inside was a plain white envelope. No return address, no note, no explanation, just cash. Every dollar, $649.23. I counted it twice, then laughed harder than I had in months. Not because I won, at least not entirely. What felt satisfying wasn't the money. It was the acknowledgement, the fact that reality had finally caught up with him. The lawsuit never made it to court. I withdrew the filing. The matter was settled, and from that day forward, something remarkable happened. Russell never touched my lawn again. Not once, not even by accident. You could have measured the distance between his tires and my property line with a ruler. Every turn became perfect. Every parking maneuver became precise. Apparently backing up correctly had been possible the entire time. Who knew? Months passed. Winter arrived. Christmas lights appeared around the neighborhood. The tension slowly faded into the background. Then one cold evening, just before Christmas, we happened to reach the mailbox at the same time. The street was quiet. A few houses had lights blowing through their windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Russell grabbed his mail, looked over, and nodded toward the side lawn. Looks good. I followed his gaze. The repairs had healed beautifully. The grass was thick again. Healthy, green. I looked back at him. Turns out it grows pretty well when nobody drives over it. For the first time since I'd met him, he actually smiled. Just a little. A reluctant smile. Then he shook his head and walked back toward his house. And honestly, that was probably the closest thing I'd ever get to an apology. Now, whenever I tell this story, people usually split into 2 groups. One group says I absolutely did the right thing. The other says I should have let it go, that it was only grass. That filing paperwork was excessive. Maybe they're right. Maybe I could have built a fence. Maybe I could have installed decorative boulders. Maybe I could have spent less energy fighting and more energy moving on. But here's the thing, I don't think this was ever really about the lawn. I think neighborhoods survive because people quietly agree to respect boundaries, not just property lines, personal boundaries, social boundaries, basic decency. The moment someone decides that convenience matters more than your effort, your space, or your rights, something starts breaking down. And sometimes the only language certain people understand is consequences. Not anger, not yelling, not revenge, just consequences. So now I want to hear from you. Was I justified for documenting everything and taking legal action? Or did I let a petty dispute turn into an obsession? If someone repeatedly crossed your property line after multiple warnings, how far would you have gone before taking action? Drop your thoughts in the comments because honestly, after everything that happened, I'm still curious where people draw that line.